Price did not collapse randomly. It moved through structure that was already defined. The breakdown was not the beginning. It was the result of earlier failure. The March 25th Asia session formed between two existing U.S. session boundaries. Above was the upper region of the March 24th U.S. session. Below was the lower region of the developing March 25th U.S. structure. This is not expansion space. This is containment. When a session forms between prior session boundaries, it inherits their limits. That means distance is not free. It must be earned. Price initially held inside that space, but then it moved lower. It broke its own session boundary. That alone is not enough. What matters is where it goes next. It did not stop at the immediate level. It continued lower. It broke below the March 24th Asia session structure. Then it moved further into the lower boundary of the March 24th U.S. session. Still, it did not stop. It continued again and reached the lower boundary of the March 20th U.S. session. This sequence matters because it shows continuity of interaction, not reaction. Price did not jump. It moved through layers. Each layer was already present. This is time in action. Sessions define the path, not candles. Now look at volatility. The movement expanded as price moved lower. But that expansion did not begin at the bottom. It began at the boundary failure. When the March 25th Asia session failed to hold inside its range, volatility expanded. That expansion carried through multiple session levels. This is not a single move. This is layered release. Now consider position. At the start, price was inside overlapping session structure. That is neutral positioning. When price is inside, continuation is limited. Once it breaks out of that overlap, positioning shifts. Now price is no longer negotiating. It is relocating. But relocation does not mean completion, because relocation must find new acceptance. Now interaction increases. Each boundary that price touches creates response. But in this sequence, interaction did not reverse the move. It continued it. This means pressure is aligned. Which brings us to pressure. The move lower was not chaotic. It was directional pressure building through repeated boundary interaction. Each failure to hold created more pressure. And that pressure carried forward. This is the key distinction. Breakdown is not a single event. It is a sequence of failed holds. Now the important question becomes clear. Where does this sequence slow down? Because slowing defines the next condition. And that is where the next session begins to matter. Now we move into the March 26th U.S. session. This is where most people misread the chart, because after a strong move, they expect continuation. But structure does not operate on expectation. It operates on location. The March 26th U.S. session formed directly on the upper region of the March 20th U.S. session boundary. This is not random placement. This is a structural landing zone. Price did not continue immediately. It paused. This pause is critical, because pause defines potential acceptance. Now observe what happened next. Price attempted to move higher. It moved toward the upper structure, toward earlier U.S. session memory. This looked like recovery, but it did not hold. This is the same condition repeated. Attempt without persistence. Now the key detail. This move approached the upper boundary but did not establish duration above it. This tells you something important. The structure above still holds weight. It has not been accepted. Now volatility begins to change. After expansion, compression begins to appear. Not full compression, partial. The 20 Bollinger Bands begin to respond. Expansion slows, but not evenly. The lower side remains extended longer. This creates asymmetry. That asymmetry matters, because it tells you pressure has not reversed, only paused. Now, position is still below prior structure. This is not recovery positioning. This is lower acceptance testing. Now, interaction becomes sharper. Price touches the boundary, then reacts, then returns. This repetition increases sensitivity and reduces tolerance. This is where execution changes. In a trending move, continuation is viable. In this environment, continuation becomes conditional, because structure is deciding, not momentum. Now pressure weakens slightly, but does not reverse. This is critical. A weakening slope is not a reversal. It is hesitation. And hesitation often leads to continuation. Now we move into the next transition, because the real move does not happen here. It happens after this hesitation fails. Now the March 26th Asia session forms, and this is where the structure becomes clear. The session forms at the lower boundary of the March 26th US session. This is edge positioning, not neutral, not inside. At the edge. And edges define outcomes. Price moves lower, not slightly, decisively. It breaks below the recent session structure, then continues toward the lower boundary of the March 3rd US session. This is a higher timeframe reference, and this is where the move stabilizes. Now everything aligns. Time shows sequential movement through sessions. Volatility expanded during the break, then began to compress slightly at the new level. Position shifted from overlap to lower structure. Interaction failed to reverse the move at intermediate levels. Pressure carried through multiple boundaries. This is a full structural cycle, from compression to failed expansion to relocation. Now the important part is execution, because this environment is no longer the same. The structure has shifted lower, so behavior must adjust. There are three conditions now. First, if price returns to the March 26th US session boundary and fails again, then the structure above remains rejection. Second, if price begins interacting repeatedly at the current lower boundary, then compression is forming again. Third, if price moves back above the March 20th US session region and holds, then relocation may reverse. But until that happens, the structure remains lower. This is not about direction. It is about acceptance. Which level is being accepted? And which level is being rejected? Right now, price is not exploring new space. It is processing inside older memory. And until that processing completes, movement will continue to follow structure.